Hello, hello, my brothers and sisters. This is Garrett Bake, your brother in arms, and welcome to another episode of Awaken the Guardian. Today we are, continuing our conversation from last week. We had Captain Marcy Cox on our program sharing her life story, her experiences of what it's like not only to be a female police officer, but also the struggles that she experienced over her 20-year career, which ended with her now being the can I say HBIC? I just said it. HBIC at the Police Academy. For those of you that don't know what it is, go look it up. No, that's she really is influencing and changing the lives of these recruits here for the Department of Public Safety in Arizona. But the reason that I brought her on, I actually didn't know much about her personal story other than what we're going to talk about right now. And she touched on it briefly on this last episode. And that was this topic of suicide. Police officer suicides. So before we go deeper into her experience, I want to throw some numbers out to you, right? So there was a study conducted by the Rubin Family Foundation. It's a nonprofit, philanthropic, I don't know if I'm even saying that right, philanthropy, I know how to say that word. So they work basically with people with disabilities, depression, PTSD, and other issues. They conducted this study last year, in 2017. There were 129 line of duty deaths, officers that were killed in the line of duty, right? There were 140 police officer suicides. Which one gets all the attention? There's only one, and that's the line of duty deaths, right? So we yell and scream about the people that hate cops, and we yell and scream about people should respect us and love us more. But the truth is that we don't even respect and love ourselves. Now these numbers, this 140 police suicides, does not include police officers who have already retired. And as you've already heard, and we're going to go deeper in today, Marcy's father committed suicide. He was retired. Here's another fact. Less than 5% of departments nationwide have some type of suicide prevention program. So what's missing right here is not the fact that there's suicides being committed, right? Because they are. What's missing is the conversation around it. It doesn't matter if you're PD, if you're fire, any type of first responder, we don't talk about suicide. Here in Mesa, a couple of weeks ago, there was a fire captain who committed suicide. And he didn't just commit suicide, he committed suicide while he was on the phone with his police officer wife. So the issue is that we don't talk about mental health amongst first responders. Every day you go out and every day you deal with the filth, you deal with the vile, you deal with death and destruction and the evil people. You have to hold dead babies. You have to somehow pull body parts out of a mangled vehicle. You have to deal with people who tell you how much they want to kill you. And then you got to go home and pretend like nothing happened. Because when you go home, what normally happens? Well, you have family duties to take care of. Dishes, the dog, laundry, dinner, and you still haven't dealt with these things inside of you. Nobody's taught you to cope with that. Nobody's taught you how to process that, right? We all just get to go home and pretend that it's okay, and it's really not. So that's the purpose of this episode, is we're going to talk about Marcy and her experiences. And again, Marcy, I thank you for coming, and I thank you for sharing your experience, because there are not many people who talk about this. And I appreciate you reaching out and actually, I didn't ask you to lay it out. You laid it out. And it was beautiful, because this is what we need to be talking about right now as police officers, is your mental health.
Yeah.
We need to be talking about you taking care of yourself. So let's go a little deeper into your experience. I'll kind of recap. So you're having some personal issues at home with your first husband. You're diving headfirst into work because, well, that's where you can find solace. That's where you're comfortable. That's where you know what you need to do.
Right.
You got two little girls at home, and you're being the absentee mom at this point. So you're struggling at home, and all of a sudden, let's pick up with the story again. What happens?
So I get a late night phone call, and it was the most surprising phone call I've ever received in my life, completely unexpected. In fact, I had actually just talked to my dad a couple hours before that phone call came through, since it was Father's Day, and the call was to let me know that he had committed suicide.
So on Father's Day of 2005,
Mm-hmm.
you get a phone call after you'd already spoken with your father
Right.
that he had committed suicide.
Yes.
Now, again, looking back, you didn't know this at the time, but looking back, what was going on in his life?
So my dad was a single child. Both his parents passed away when I was in the academy. So I think he kind of saw himself as a lone wolf. He remarried when I was in high school to a woman, and they had just a very tumultuous relationship. Over the years, he started drinking more, and at some point, just literally months before he ended his life, they decided to up and leave San Diego, which was where my dad had spent his entire life.
Right.
And they were going to sell everything and move to Show Low, Arizona, and they were going to retire. And both my older brother and I obviously had some conversations about that and went, this is so out of character. It's so not like Dad to leave, all of his friends, like I told you, growing up in that 7-Eleven store, and every cop in town would come, and those were his boys. That was kind of his life. And so then he was leaving all of that and moving to Show Low, where we have no family. In fact, I'm the only person in Arizona at all in my family. My brothers are in Colorado. And so it was out of character. And, we asked some tough questions, and the answers we got was it was just time for them to settle down.
So I want you guys to see, she's going to tell the personal story, and I'm going to kind of to show the bigger picture. I want you guys to see what's going on here. So a man whose identity was tied to police work.
Absolutely.
And he worked as a police officer, then as a reserve, and then owned a store where, guess what? All the police officers hung out. So his entire adult life has been surrounded by police officers.
Right.
And now, all of a sudden, he's moving to Show Low, Arizona. Now, I'll give you a little background on Show Low. Population, maybe 15, 20,000.
Right.
It's up in the mountains. It's very isolated. There's not a lot going on there.
Right.
And so I can't speak for him because I wasn't there, but he is transitioning now from everything that he's known and held close to him to complete and utter isolation. Now, how long was he living in Show Low before he committed suicide?
A few months, I think 3 to 4 months.
A few months.
Yeah.
Now, I want you guys to see this. Like, suicide is not something that all of a sudden somebody's like, oh, I'm going to commit suicide. Like, this is a years-long process. What happens is the same thing that is associated with this word that we call PTSD. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder, I can't give you the history of why it was created, but for the longest time they didn't have a name for it, so we made up a name for it. But all PTSD is our inability to deal with what's going on, i.e., our brain doesn't know how to react. Going back to police work, you know about fight, flight, or freeze. Your body is naturally programmed to fight, flight, or freeze. Some of you are fighters, some of you are runners, and some of you completely shut down. But each of us possesses one of these three things. All of these three things. So what ends up happening is PTSD comes into play, right? And PTSD goes into the freeze. Our bodies do not know what to do, so they panic, they freeze. And it's a lack of being able to understand what to do. Some of us are able to work through this, but most of us are not. And I know a lot of you right now who have gone to see psychologists or psychiatrists, and they tell you that it's okay, here's a pill, and go live your life. And so now you become a label, I have PTSD, and now you become addicted to a pill which you think is going to help you, which hasn't actually solved the problem, which is you still don't know how to deal with whatever it was that happened.
Right.
So I want to go back to your side of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
This completely rocked your world, not only because he was your father, but because he was a police officer.
Right.
And here you are following in his footsteps doing the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going through your mind when this is happening?
It was just a very confusing time for me. I think for anyone who's dealt with suicide, I think the hardest part for me, the logical cop in me, you want to understand and you can't. And coming to the point in your life where you have to accept something that you can't understand was the key for me to be able to move on. We want to be able to understand. You want to be able to, have a list of options of, A, B, or C. Why did he do it? Was it one of these? And be able to say, well, I can make sense of, there's this evidence to say it was A and put a label on it. But I think, for me, I've never been suicidal. So I don't understand it. I know my brothers have different perceptions of it than me. We all see it a little differently. I think for me, I just had to get to the point where I had to accept the fact that it was his choice. He did it, and I'm not going to understand why, and that's okay, Yeah.
So guys, listen. And this took me a long time to actually acknowledge it. Like, I've had suicidal thoughts before. When I was at the bottom of my life not working, when I was sitting in this parking garage wondering if life was worth living anymore. Like, this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, would my family be better off without me? And I'm trying to justify it by saying, oh, well, they'll have my pension, they'll have the house, the kids will have free college. Like, we start to justify this as an excuse, right? Because it's the easier way out. Instead of actually dealing with the fact of what's going on, which is I don't know how to process whatever traumatic event happened, we shift to saying, okay, this is the easier way out. And nobody's talking about it. So this big movement around veterans and suicide has been around for a few years now. I think it's 22 a day, and they've got different campaigns and programs and whatever. What is there for police officers? There is not a damn thing. Because this is what happens. If you admit that you're having suicidal thoughts, you will no longer be working the street.
That's right.
Odds are you'll be at home and you'll be under some type of psychiatric evaluation. Which means the only thing that is keeping you sane has been taken away from you.
Right.
And we go back to talking about your father. The only thing that was keeping him sane was he still got to hang out with his boys.
Right.
Like, he wasn't a cop anymore.
Right.
But they would always come in and he could give them coffee and, like, they could talk shop.
Right.
They could talk about being a cop and what happened and all that stuff. Listen, I'm not going to lie to you. I retired last year. I don't regret leaving because of the politics and what happens in that environment. But you know what I miss? I miss being with the boys. I miss that camaraderie. I still go, I'm a reserve, I still go ride. And I have my vest and I have my gun, and it's like almost like I'm right back in it, right? But I see this. I see the separation between the two. And I see the difficulty that happens. So how did this affect what was happening in your life? So you're already kind of on a rocky foundation in your marriage, mm-hmm. and then your father commits suicide. Like, what did this cause you to do mentally?
I was unbelievably broken. For me, it was as low as I think I've ever been. I was utterly shaken. I kind of felt like I didn't know who I was anymore, because my dad was such a big part of the identity that I'd created for myself, that suddenly I started questioning everything about me. And it was probably the greatest thing that ever happened, because it forced me to look inward for the first time, where, like we talked in the first podcast, that, I was getting accolades and praise for being the person I thought my agency wanted me to be. But then the person that the agency wanted me to be was a person that was heading down the same path of destruction that my dad went down. So I went completely really into just a tailspin.
So when you're talking about like this lowest point in your life, like what are some of the things that you're like starting to question about yourself?
I actually questioned whether I should be in law enforcement anymore. Questioned my capacity as a mother. Questioned, obviously, my marriage and made the decision to walk away from it. So not all good came from it. I mean, there were very difficult decisions that came as a result of it too. But literally questioning everything, questioning, whether the person that I thought I knew and wanted to be like, was that real? Did I choose to ignore traits in my dad that weren't that great? And I think I did. I think, naturally as kids, we tend to do that. We tend to see the best in our parents and sometimes ignore the negative.
What were some of these traits that you had?
That level of stubbornness where you always have to be right. That was probably the biggest one. My dad was an enormously wonderful storyteller. Everybody loved being around him because he was fun and energetic. But he always had to have his way. He was incredibly stubborn, always had to have the last word. And so I was raised around that. I was raised to be a really good servant. Which is why the academy and everything was so easy, because it was do as I say, not as I do type. And I think I became that way too, for sure.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I want you guys to hear this process that she just talked it through. And I was going to ask her the question, but she answered it herself. Her father, the trait that was least appealing, that served him the least, that was hardest on her and the rest of her family, is what she eventually ended up becoming.
Absolutely.
But like how does this happen? Let me ask you. I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot. How does it happen that the things that you want least in life, you end up becoming?
I think it's just we don't know better, and we're not conscious enough of our own behavior to recognize that we're doing it.
We are not conscious enough of our own behavior to recognize that we're doing it. Like, this is why your life ends up at a place where you're like, how in the hell did I get here?
Yeah.
How in the hell did I get here? How in the hell did I become the stubborn asshole?
Right.
How in the hell did I end up telling my wife I wanted a divorce, or my husband? How in the hell did I get to this point where I put my career before my family? Like, these things happen simply because we don't have anything in place, any process to consciously deal with this until, I don't want to say it's too late, but it gets to a point where it's too late. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, you either learn to deal with it or your life will fall apart. There is no in between.
Right.
So for some people, falling apart is they get divorced. For other people, falling apart means suicide, which happened in this instant.
Right.
So for any of you out there who are struggling with, life is not working the way I want it to work right now, or things aren't happening the way I want them to happen, it's time to stop and literally take stock. And a lot of people say this, but you need a process in place to say, what's reality and what's fantasy? What's the truth and what's not? And am I living my life based on fact or based on fiction? And we've talked about this in your entire life. And it's the same thing in mine. And you guys have heard this now from multiple people. You heard this from Scott, who talked about his officer-involved shooting and the fact that the guilt and the shame that was surrounded by that drove him to this point where he was also contemplating suicide. He literally wasn't sleeping anymore, just wandering around his house because his mind couldn't process things. So listen, you're not alone. This is the first thing that you need to understand. You are not alone. Every police officer faces this in some varying form. Every police officer questions if they're doing it right. Every police officer asks if they can do it better. It doesn't make you broken. It doesn't make you different. It just makes you like everybody else. So back to you. This heavily affected not only your family, as in your brothers and your sisters. I'm sorry, your brothers, no sisters. But it also ended up tearing apart your marriage.
Right.
So we talked about in the last episode, you promoted. Like, what shifted your ability to process who you were at this time?
I think there were a couple things. So in the last episode, I talked about a sergeant who is still with our agency today, who I didn't work for, but he reached out to me every day during those couple of weeks that I was off. And when I returned to work and I felt complete solitude, I felt like everybody turned their back on me. He was kind of the one person that then all of a sudden I wanted to be like him. I wanted to emulate what he did for me. I wanted to pass that on to other people. I wanted to be the person that didn't ignore other people's issues.
So he helped you put, like, when you literally were at wit's end, like there was nobody. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to this previous episode, I highly recommend it. This will all make sense to you. But when she went back to work, it was like a pin drop, like everybody scattered. And so she was left alone, which was going down the same path as your father.
Right.
That feeling of alone. And again, you never got to the point where you were contemplating suicide or anything like that. But there's nothing to say that had this specific sergeant not reached out, that wouldn't have been an option that you would have seen.
Right. Absolutely.
So listen, I keep going back to this and I'm going to keep harping on it. Like, you are not different. And by the same token, you are not alone. Just because we're stubborn assholes and refuse to acknowledge that we have issues doesn't mean that the issues are going to go away. And there's always somebody that's willing to listen.
There is.
So the first step of you dealing with any of your issues is talking about it. And frankly, it's one of the hardest ones.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's that beginning. Talk about it. But after you start talking about it, I love what it was that you did with your ex-husband. What was it that you did with him?
The letter writing?
Yes.
Yeah. So shortly after we split and were going through a divorce, things were not going the way between us as I'd hoped they would. We both had our own hurt and things that we were dealing with. And so one of the things that probably the biggest turning point, for sure the biggest turning point, was I wrote him a long letter. And I called it the Raising of the White Flag letter. And it was me falling on the sword for everything that went wrong and asking for his forgiveness and asking for him to allow me and us to put our daughters first. Yeah.
So what she did basically was she started to tell the truth. And so this process of us getting what we want, first we have to be willing to talk about it, right? But not only just willing to talk about it in a roundabout way. We literally have to fall on the sword, exactly like you said. We have to be willing to tell the truth. Because until you're willing to tell the truth, it's impossible for you to get what you want. Like, I love this relating this to GPS, right? We talk about GPS all day long, and I don't think any of us would survive nowadays without GPS. But how is it that GPS works? It starts with knowing exactly what? Where you are.
Where you are now.
Like,
yeah.
You have to start somewhere. Like, I could tell you how to get to the Circle K, 4 miles down the road if I know where you are. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And this is the same thing with your life, right? We all want to go somewhere. We all want a better marriage, want a better body, want a better connection with God. We want to make more money. We want all of these things, but we're unwilling to look at the facts. We're unwilling to face the truth. But the funny thing is, and you said it in this last episode, it was the truth will set you free. You felt liberated.
Right.
Because now it's like, okay, all this stuff is gone, right? The blinders are off, and now I can see what is it exactly that I want. And that led you down this new path that has allowed you to be in a position now where you can be mom, where you can dedicate your time to what really matters to you.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you guys who are listening to this, why, because this is a good question, why have you been unwilling to look at the truth? Is it because it hurts too much? Is it because you don't know how to deal with it? Like, what's the reason why? And so I'll ask you that same question. So what was the reason why you were unwilling to look at the truth?
I think I shared with you, I was teaching the lateral class at DPS the other day. And I shared with them and I talk openly about the fact that my greatest fear is a fear of failure. And I think it's a very common thing for cops. I think, we all want to be at the top of our game. We all want to be great at everything. And we want people to talk about it because it feels good, fills the ego. And so outside of spiders, who I'm also deathly afraid of, no, my real like intrinsic fear is of failure. I don't want to let anybody down that's close to me.
Right. And so it's easier for us to ignore what's not working because then we don't have to deal with the fact that it might fail. Like I have the same fear as Marcy does. Like my biggest fear is failure. Doesn't matter if it's in business. It doesn't matter if it's with my body. Hell, my biggest fear, honestly, is not being a good dad and not being a good husband. Honestly, that's my biggest fear. And so I would run from the one thing that I should have been paying more attention to, which was my family.
Yeah.
And I would run to work, and then more work, and then a little more work. Oh, my wife doesn't get me? Cool, I'm going to go hang out with the boys. Cool, I'm going to go do this other stuff. Oh, my wife and my kids really don't love me? This is a story I'm telling myself? Cool. I don't want to be here anymore. I want a divorce. And then when you're off on your own, you suddenly realize what really matters.
Right. Yeah.
And so, listen, the facts are the facts. You can't hide from them. This is the funniest thing about us as police officers. We demand the facts from everybody that we come into contact with. Everybody. It doesn't matter if it's a simple traffic stop. What do we got? Name, date of birth, driver's license number, blah, 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 blah. Facts. Cool. Or a complex drug investigation. Well, what were the facts? Oh, at 8:53 p.m. they crossed the border with this vehicle, blah, 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 and this happened. Like, our reports are littered with facts. But we're unwilling to examine the exact same facts in our personal life.
Right.
Because you're no longer sitting in the chair of, I know you did it. No, now you're the suspect. Now you're on the other side.
Yes.
And that's not a comfortable position to be in.
It's not.
But again, we go back to this. The only way that you're going to get what you want out of life is to acknowledge what?
What's real?
What's real?
Yeah.
What's
really happening? Yeah.
So when your life feels like it's spinning out of control, when it feels like things aren't working, when you might even be contemplating if life is worth living anymore, stop. Take a second. And what's the truth? Like, what are the facts? So your marriage isn't working. Okay, why? Do you date your wife? Do you tell her you love her? Do you do some of these around the home chores for her? Like, what do you do to treat her any different than a suspect? That's the question you need to be asking. It's the same thing with your body. There's so many overweight cops, and I know you see this too. We ignore the facts. Oh, my duty belt really isn't fitting anymore. Maybe because it's old. No, the facts are you eat like shit. So do something about it, right?
Right.
So it's only the ability of us to look at the facts that will allow us to get what we want out of life, right? Once we can come to this place of the truth, then we can ask the next question, which is, what is it that I want? And I love that you, after, in your words, waving the white flag, falling on the sword, delivering this letter to your ex-husband, what did that open up for you?
Everything changed after that. Not only did it provide an amazing life for our daughters who didn't deserve the choices that we made, primarily me, but I'm incredibly fortunate to have somebody that I've known for years and years and years that knows me in and out. That's still a best friend. That is somebody that I can go to no matter what and doesn't judge me and sees me for who I am, knows the ugly that existed that people today don't see because I'm a different person now. But I mean, I'm that same person. All that stuff exists, but he actually got to experience it and live it and still accepts me as me. So it's great.
So what that did is it allowed the possibility to exist, which was co-parenting in this case.
Yep.
And a lot of you, listen, some marriages don't work out. Like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every marriage works out because they don't. Some of it is our fault, some of it isn't, which happened in your second instance.
Right.
But the truth is that nothing will exist until you're willing to deal with the facts. And so, your first marriage didn't work out, but now you have a close relationship. Like, I want you guys to understand this. How many times have you had to go to a police station or a Circle K or something for a civil standby, i.e., dad has to give kids back to mom, and because they don't get along, the police officers have to be there all the time. But see, you can create whatever relationship you want. So maybe you already got divorced. I'm not saying you're going to get back together, but what I'm saying is you can create whatever it is that you want. So what do you really want? In this case, you wanted to have a close relationship with your ex-husband, which you do. Like, this is absolutely amazing. The fact that you guys are so close and that you co-parent to the best of your abilities.
Yeah, my kids have never paid the price. We've been very, very fortunate. They came home multiple times in their younger years, middle school age, where, something would happen where they would do some round table at school and it would come up, about parents being divorced, and they'd come home and we'd talk about it, and they say, we just don't feel like it. Like, I know we have two different houses, but we just have two sets of parents, but everybody's involved and we all do things together, and we don't feel different like the other kids do. We don't suffer. And man, those have been some of the greatest conversations in my life,
You can't replace it because your kids, guess what? They don't care about the stories you tell them. They care about the facts.
Right.
The facts are that you're present as mom.
Right.
Facts are your ex is present as dad. And so the children see this and they feel it and they experience it. So that becomes their reality.
Right.
So you want to have a better life, start to deal with the facts, which will allow you to get you what you want. Period. So before we end this, I want to ask for any last words of advice that you have for any police officer out there, or frankly any man or any woman whose life isn't working and may actually be contemplating something like this.
I think it's just an overall piece of advice for anybody that's struggling with anything. If you're somewhere that doesn't feel right, you're going down a bad path, you're dealing with a challenge that feels overwhelming, do something different. When we continue to do the same things over and over and over, the result is going to be the same. And sometimes the turns we make don't make sense at the time. They might later on. But reach out to people that you trust to seek advice when things don't make sense. And hopefully there will be somebody there that'll catch you and help guide you down the right path. But I think going down a different path is absolutely crucial. And that's hard because we resist change.
You're right. And the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It's not going to happen. So listen, again, I will extend this invitation. If you're struggling, reach out. Like Facebook, Instagram, email me, Gerritt, Gerritt, @warriorguardian.com. I actually don't give out my phone number because I have had some crazies reach out, and I don't want that. So that's not you guys. But seriously, if you're having any issues, you have any questions, you have any doubts, reach out. I have a program specifically for police officers to help them get clear on exactly what we just talked about. Life's not working. Okay, where am I at? What do I want? How am I going to get there? If this sounds like you, quit waiting. Because if you keep waiting, you're going to keep experiencing the same results, and your life is going to continue to get worse. I don't want it to get worse. We don't need any more police officer suicides. What we need is more stories of police officers figuring their lives out and then living their life on purpose. So, Marcy, thank you again for coming. I so appreciate this.
Thank you for having me.
You guys, you don't understand how special this is to have somebody who is in her position, not only by rank, but also by life experience, willing to talk and share her entire story with you in the hopes of allowing you to see the possibilities that exist in your life. So, as always, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next one.